Welcome, everybody, to my Boomer Buddies podcast, where we tell it like it was and is. Today, I have three friends on, and we're going to be talking about our trials and tribulations dealing with cancer. This is show number 2 on cancer. And today, we have two podcasters who are part of the podcast group that I'm a member of. First of all, we have Ed Halbach of the Ed Halbach Show. Ed, welcome to my Boomer Buddies podcast.
Hey, thanks, Rick. I'm proud to be a boomer and proud to be on your show.
All right. And we have Tim Coffey, who's got Love and Peace, a Beatles podcast. And we've done a few shows together. And Tim, welcome as well to
Thank
the
you.
show.
It's great to be here, Rick. Thank you.
And as always, we have Tere Walsh, one of my favorite boomer buddies. She's joining us today. And what we're going to do today is have a conversation about dealing with cancer. Tim and Ed have lost spouses to cancer, and we want them to share the journey they went on with their wives as they battled cancer. Ed, let me start with you. Why don't you give a little background about your first wife and what happened with her and her cancer diagnosis and all the way through how you helped her?
Well, I could only help her and be there for her. She had a phenomenal support group. It was 2.5 years from when she was diagnosed with colon cancer. And I have to share a few little stories with her because maybe I gained some of my personality from her. But when she was in the hospital for the first time, she had just turned 40 years old. And she had tons of friends. And actually, I think they wanted to call security on us. There were so many people in her hospital room. So when we left that night, and this was before she was going to have one of many surgeries, everybody was leaving. I told her good night, and she goes, they say when you hit 40, life starts going downhill, but I didn't know it was going to be this steep. And we kept our humor through the next 2.5 years to the end, and right down to I left the house one day when her spa girls came over as she was nearing the end of her life in our home, and because I hadn't bought any cemetery plots. So one of the stories I like to tell, and we tried to keep it light, was I came back to the house and she goes, "Where did you go?" I said, "Well, dear, we own some more property." And I left it at that.
So having time between when she was diagnosed and when she finally passed, do you think that really helped you prepare? Is there such a thing to help you prepare for when she finally does leave? Did she give you permission to live life, or how was that handled?
She did. She gave me permission to go out, be successful, enjoy life, get married again if you want to. I'll be okay. And I will say, we were workaholics. We never had a family. We put everything into our business as far as our time and energy. But once she got that diagnosis, we lived a different life. We took trips. We went here, we went there, because the diagnosis was less than a 5% chance of living 5 years. Even through all the things we did, plus I'm trying to think of the word to use, the experimental drugs that probably wouldn't help her, but for research. And she was very kind and said, "I'll go through it if it'll help the next person." So when you talk about how you deal with it and the time we had, this is kind of selfish, but I've rethought it and it worked well. I was ready to go to work a week after her funeral. I had grieved for basically 2.5 years, which I didn't know I did. And I was ready to move on. I had permission. It's just the way it went.
Tim, what's your story, and how did you handle the diagnosis that your wife had, and how much time did you have with her once you found out she had cancer?
Yeah, we moved to Mason City in January of 1996 from Rockford, Illinois. I took a new job running a hospital foundation here for Mercy Medical Center. And my wife was a smoker, and our son was a freshman at the time. at Creighton University in Omaha, and that was he's my stepson, and I raised him since I was 7, so I call him my son. But Jeffrey was at Creighton, so it was just Chris and I. We bought a house, and we rented a house for 6 months from the hospital. Then we found a house and bought it, and she was in that house for 3 weeks before she died. She got diagnosed with lung cancer
Hmm.
and died a month to the day of her diagnosis. I distinctly remember a phone call, a late night phone call that she gave me, and she said she was scared. She was going to go in for some chemotherapy for her first treatment, and she was going to see if she could leave the hospital for a couple hours to get her hair done. But she joked and said, they kind of marked up my chest for X-ray purposes and all, and she said, geez, I kind of look like Cher with all of the markings, and so she had
That's
her sense
cute.
of humor about it too. But when she passed, my support group were a couple of different things. Obviously, I found myself completely alone with no family here. My brother did a great thing. He chartered a plane and flew up for the service, and he had business meetings, and he had to fly back the same day. But the way I cope in a lot of situations is I need some type of structure. So I've through the funeral home and through hospice, I found two different grief support groups that
Good.
were really, really very helpful to me. And I think one of them I was the only guy. And the other support group, although they didn't know it at the time, because I didn't have any family here, were the employees that I work with at the hospital. And they were incredibly supportive. The saying that we picked up in the support group is the first year is the toughest. And I got through the first year relatively okay. For me, the second year hit me like a ton of bricks. I don't know why, but it just, I remember I was carrying groceries in from the garage to the house on a Friday night. And for some reason, I almost threw the damn grocery bag on the counter and yelled at my wife, Chris. I said, "You should be here helping me with this." And I just broke down. Another indirect support that I had too, in terms of structure, was we had pets. We had two cats and a dog. And so that kind of kept me on a schedule in a sense because I had to be there at certain times for them for feeding and walking the dog and so on. It was a real journey. It really was. And I think it was close to the beginning of my fourth year that I had any type of date with anybody. And I was married to my wife for 13 years. I got married at age 35. Chris was 47 when she died. So, I had that reacquaintance with getting out and socializing was another challenge that I had too, because I was, kind of the lone wheel here. Anyway, I got by and I met in my fifth year after my Chris died. I met my now wife of 23 years. So, everything has a purpose and leads us in different directions. And I still think of Chris very, very frequently. I'm looking right now at the tiny little urn that I have with their ashes there. And by the way, we took Chris's ashes out to Breckenridge, Colorado. We vacationed there quite frequently in the summer,
Mhm.
and she loved it. I loved it, and so there was a little creek that we always went to, and I probably shouldn't have done it, but we put her ashes in the creek, knowing and hoping that her ashes will flow down to the Gulf of Mexico and she'll be in the ocean. And she was originally from Southern California, so she loved the ocean.
Terry,
Yes.
we're both survivors of cancer, and we were both blessed to be in recovery. And one thing that I have to say is both of them talked about support. Ed had support and he went to work right away. Tim had grief support that he found. It's a wonderful thing. You lost James, but not to cancer, but it's still a loss of a loved one. How have you coped with that along with getting cancer right away?
When I got the cancer 5 weeks after his celebration of life,
Mm.
I was honestly glad he wasn't here because he was always protective of me. But yet I wanted him here to help me go through it. I didn't want to go through it alone. I'm kind of like Tim. This is the second year and I am really having a tough time with it. Just the other day, all day crying everything. And then both Friday and Saturday, 3 commercials that he did came on all in a row
Wow.
on TV. And it was like, okay, now what? I have friends. I have a lot of girlfriends that have helped me. The Gypsy Boys have helped me. But as Ed and Tim probably know, and you too, Rick, you got better. But when someone dies, everybody's right there right away with the hot dish and the support and the cards and phone calls, and then it fades off. And
Mhm.
I mean, they can't be doing that forever. Just going from all this attention to going to this silent house because James died and the dog died and now I have cancer. It was really surreal almost. So I'm trying to work on it right now with James's passing, and we'll see where it goes.
Well, one thing, you're helping me just like James did. And in turn, I'm trying to help you as well. It's kind of a mutual thing because James picked me up when I was at my lowest. Whenever I wake up every day, I want to just make somebody smile. And Ed has daily affirmations that he sends out. He's just a good guy. And if you want to, Ed, you're giving a look of surprise that I'm saying you're a good guy, but you send out affirmation emails every morning. And if anybody wants to get on there, it's very helpful. If you're having a down day or a bad day or just a regular day, Ed's quotes can really hit home. Ed, how can they get onto your email list?
They can just email me through my website, edhalbach.com. That's EDHALBACH.com, or email me direct at ed@edhalbach.com. And I will not sell your email address. I will not send it to anybody. I just want to spread inspiring quotes that I use myself to help other people. And it's amazing the people who email me back out of the blue, and some of them I don't know personally, and they say, "How did you know I needed to hear that?" That makes me feel like my few clicks to put that up there and out were definitely worth it.
That's great, Ed. I think people need to hear it whether you know it or not. It's just a very kind thing to do.
Well, it's kind of selfish. I do it for myself, but then to spread it, sometimes it hits home and sometimes, yeah. And that's the way people tell me about it, and they want to sign up for it. So it's thank you. I enjoy doing it. So, Terry, if you send me your email, I will definitely put you on the list.
All right, I will do that.
Okay.
Perfect.
And check out fellow podcaster Ed Halbach Show, The Ed Halbach Show. Tim Coffey, he's also a podcaster, and he's got a wonderful Beatles podcast. Peace and Love, a Beatles podcast is what it's called. And Tim also gives adult learning lectures at, can you give me the name of the school again, Tim? I never seem
Sure.
to get it right.
It's North Iowa Area Community College in Mason City. Abbreviated, it's NIAC, NIAAC.
And when is your next presentation on the Beatles and what's the topic?
I believe it's on a Thursday, November 14th, at 2 p.m.
And I'm doing my best to go down there. I saw your last one in March and it was fantastic. And Terry, I highly recommend you check out the Beatles podcast. You're a music lover, fellow boomer. Tim does good things as well.
I will do that, Tim. I've heard many good things about your podcast.
Thank you.
Do you have anything else, Terry, that you want to talk about regarding how you're dealing with the recovery? You are going into therapy now. I don't want to get too personal, but you're still working hard. And I'm really impressed that you go, and you're always up, you're always smiling and sending words of encouragement yourself via text and phone calls.
I did go to my first physical therapy today because I cannot feel my feet. I have neuropathy and it makes me fall down a lot, and I'll be 70, so I need to not fall and break a hip or something. And in my fingertips, I can't feel them. So I am starting physical therapy for that, and working with a neurologist. So it continues on at least through September, and then we'll see where I'm at that point. But I think people really have to know, even though you're, like you say, Rick, you're in remission, you're still tired and you still have to build up your immune system. And it, just because the cancer's gone doesn't mean everything else is gone.
Yeah,
It's a long journey.
it is. It's taking me 2 years to feel halfway normal now. I was thinking about when I was putting the softener pellets in, I couldn't even lift that. I had to get my adult son to come over and do that. And now I can do it no problem. But it was a long journey to get there. Thanks for bringing that up, Terry. And then I also had my 6 month CAT scan checkup. On my chart, it said it's all clear. I got a note from my oncologist, but I go in there tomorrow to see him officially. But I'm doing pretty well. And I'm very thankful and I feel very blessed. And the support group to get to this point has been amazing. And you're right, Terry, it does drop off in a lot of ways, but there's also people that are constant and checking up on you as well. And I'm very
Definitely.
thankful for that. Tim, I want to ask you about, you said you found support groups right away. Where did you find the support groups in case viewers and listeners here are in a situation where they want to find some help, some support? How can they get help?
Well, my wife in her second week had a stroke as a result of the first treatment of chemotherapy, and I guess that early, that's a rare but apparent side effect. And I was right next to her in the hospital when she had the stroke, and that was another story in itself. But so she went into hospice a couple days after that and had 2 weeks in hospice. So between the funeral home and the hospice, they each had their own support groups. So if anybody is listening and they have a loved one in hospice who passes on, the odds are there might be a support group at that hospice. And certainly maybe check with your funeral home too.
Ed, do you have any groups or support methods that you went through? I know you went to work right away because you're a go getter, you're a doer. Is there anything that you did as far as a support group that you want to share?
There was not. I was invited to a number of them, and I always declined because I am a little bit, as a salesman, a little aggressive, and I like to check things off my sheet. And working just was fantastic for me, and I knew I had to move on. Like I said earlier, I had permission, and I did not take advantage of any of them. I was asked to come and speak at one of them, but unfortunately I was out of town on business, so I had to decline. So no, I did it. I had friends that I I had one of my late wife's dear friends. And this was okay. This was 20 years ago. I still wore a suit and tie to sales calls and that, which I don't anymore. She was bound and determined for probably 2 months or so. She'd come over and iron my shirts. And, and I called her husband one day and I go, I'm really uncomfortable with this, you know. I mean, even if I was out of town, you know, she'd go over to my mother's house. I lived in a small town, to get a key and go in and iron. And her husband said, that's her therapy. So
Oh,
just let her do it. And now I don't wear dress shirts anymore.
so she stopped ironing. No need.
No, I moved. I met a lovely young lady that asked me out for coffee, and it'll be 17 years this November that
Wow.
we've been married.
And Ed, our little inside joke, did you make her pay for the coffee or?
Of course. You think I'd spring for coffee?
Terry,
Come on, Rick.
Tim and I know very well that Ed is always trying to get a free coffee out of any time we get together.
He puts new meaning to the term frugal.
I just
For,
spell it with all caps.
yeah. But Terry, he is generous in spirit. He
Yeah.
actually
Oh, Ed.
I might mention my sister-in-law died on July 19th of cancer. And so I'm working with my brother right now. He and I are the only members left in our family. And he's 12 years older than me. And he still works, believe it or not. He has his own insurance agency. But we're concerned about him as a result of the death. And he kind of works through things different than I do. But so I'm trying to give him some encouragement without making a big deal about it. And he's lives in Omaha, but he has a house in Okoboji, and so I'm going to be spending Labor Day weekend with him for the Iowa Rock and Roll Music Association that I'm involved with too. But we're concerned about him with his health. That they were married 63 years,
Wow.
so this was a
wow.
big shock for him to be alone. And luckily, what a week and a half before she died, I went in and had a quick overnight trip to Okoboji to see both my brother and sister-in-law, and she was still alive and using a walker at that point. But she died a week and a half later. But this is another victim, and it's going to occur until they find some type of cure. But that's still elusive on everybody's part.
You can't sugarcoat it. Cancer is evil. It sucks. And
Yeah.
the best you can do in a time like this is to just say, I'll be there to support you. And a lot of times people will turn it down, but you still make the offer. And a lot of times or sometimes they may accept it.
Yeah.
So that's just the way it is. Cancer has touched all of us in some way. Some of us have gotten it, some have not. And we're all in this together, aren't we?
Yeah.
Definitely.
No, nobody is immune.
That's
And
true.
and Ed has a great saying that I tell other people, but I say a good friend of mine. Maybe I should credit him with the plug it on the show too. But Ed has a saying that I've used many times. You know, hey, we're in the fourth quarter and there's no timeouts left. And
That's the boomer generation.
yeah,
Yeah.
That's us. That's us. Best cars, best music, best whatever you want to pick. I mean,
Hottest checks.
yeah, we get criticized for saying that, but we had it pretty good thanks to the greatest generation as parents. You know, they went
Right?
through a lot of hardships and wanted us to do well, and they teed it up for us. I know there's some that will look at my T-shirt and go, "Well, you boomers were spoiled and you wrecked it for everybody else." I beg to differ. I think we did pretty good. We just lived life to the fullest, and as a test to the four of us, we're just trying to give back.
I say the Earth is 4 billion years old, and we lived through Beatlemania.
There you go,
Good.
Tim.
You got the Beatles line in. I love it. I love it.
He eats, lives, and breathes the Beatles. I don't think we could stump him. He's been on my show and he's talked about the Beatles.
He is amazing. And
Uh,
just so you know, Terry Walsh, his husband, James Walsh, had the band Gypsy. If you don't know who Gypsy is, they're the greatest band and never make it mega, but they were still big in a lot of areas. And James was just a genius at music. And I encourage both of you guys and the audience out there to check out Gypsy. Fabulous, fabulous music.
Thanks, Rick.
Well, we're going to wrap it up here. I'll leave the mic for each one of you before we go. Let's start with Terry. Any parting thoughts?
Um, don't be afraid to help someone who has cancer. The littlest things, a phone call, a lunch, anything, the littlest things mean so much. And just your connection with them is a blessing for them.
Tim?
Well, I definitely echo what Terry said about reaching out and all. Similar to some of the sayings that Ed has, but carpe diem. We don't know how much time we have left. And one of the things Ed said on his podcast today with his 45 list of deep sayings was, live today and reach out and live today and enjoy life, because I think he put it like life isn't like a bow, but it's still a gift.
Yeah,
Very good.
it's still a present, right? Ed, how about you?
I thought you wanted to close this out shortly. I have so
I
many
have a few
parting
thoughts,
thoughts.
Ed.
You know me. You'll cut me out anyway. I think as we age and we are boomers, we look at life different than what we did back when, believe it or not, we had hair And but those were great times, and they're great times now, even though we all have to deal with struggles, because the longer you live, the more struggles you're going to have. But live each day in the present and don't worry about the next day.
Well said. Remember the Ed Halbach Show? Where can they listen to you, Ed?
Spotify, Apple, wherever you listen to your podcasts, I'm out there. The Ed
Okay.
Halbach Show, Halbach.
All right, Tim, where can they find your show, Love and Peace, a Beatles podcast?
Right now it's on Spotify and also Buzzsprout. I hope to expand that in the fall.
And Terry, my fellow Boomer buddy, we can catch my Boomer Buddy podcast wherever you get your audio podcast and also on YouTube, right, Terry?
That is correct.
For Ed Halbach, Tere Walsh, Tim Coffey, I'm Rick Reed for My Boomer Buddies podcast. Thank you for watching, listening, and until next time, we'll see you
around the block.
Hey, thanks for watching, and if you have anything you want to say, comment below on YouTube, and if you want to email me, you can email me at myboomerbuddies4, that's the number 4, at gmail.com.
Thank you. I worked really hard on it.